few years ago, I went camping for the first time in my life. I was about 11 or 12 when we headed out to a forest nearby our house. We were in Poland for the holidays, as every year, and right next to our house was a huge forest. So, one day we decided to take out my mom's old tent she still had from like the 90s, and just stay for a night or two in between some wildlife. Good thing, the place we chose to sleep at was only about 20, maybe 30 minutes away from the house. Bad thing, there were a lot, and I mean a lot of wolves, foxes, and boars out in that forest, and honestly, I kind of regretted going there in the first place. We set everything up at around 6 p.m., and my sister and I set up the campfire. My dad chopped down a smaller tree earlier with his oak axe, important for a later part of the story, and by now, it had dried out enough to catch fire. We sat around it for quite some time, probably around 4 hours, until it was dark, so we decided to just head to sleep then. My two sisters and I are on one end of the tent, and my parents on the other. It was probably just the fear of getting eaten alive by some wolves, or homesickness, but I couldn't sleep at all. I heard my dad tell my mom that he was going out into the forest to get some wood for the morning, while it was still fairly dry, or it would have soaked up all the dew by then. The thought of not having my dad around made it even worse for me to even close my eyes for a second. I'm not too good at telling what time it is by just staring at the sky or trying to figure out how long it's been, so I'll just say it was around 12 or 1 in the morning. I was actually falling asleep when I heard some rattling outside the tent. My first thought, wolf. I was terrified, and so I just popped out my head through the little curtain that separates the two halves of the tent, basically a piece of thin fabric just hanging on some threads, to see if my dad was back. He was still gone, and it had been about an hour since he went. I lay back down and just tried to fall asleep, but when I turned myself on my side, I saw this faint human shadow outside the tent. I froze and let out a teeny squeak. The person seemed to be holding some sort of axe, shovel-type thing in its hand, and so I thought it might have just been my dad back. The shadow walked towards the entrance of the tent and just stood there at the zipped-up door for maybe 30 seconds. I began to wonder why he wasn't just coming inside. The person finally ran off into the forest, but it dropped the axe. You could hear the footsteps fade in the distance and a thump just appear along the way. Maybe a minute or so later, I hear my dad walking back from the opposite side of the forest and enter the tent, all tired and just fell asleep. Seemed kind of sketchy and fishy and scary to me, but it was so late, I couldn't even think anymore, and I somehow fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up after my dad dropped his phone on his face, letting out an ouch. I peeped through the curtain at him, and he just smiled back while rubbing his nose. I needed some fresh air because I was feeling a bit sick, maybe from the nerves in the morning or homesickness. I couldn't really tell. Both of us got out of the tent and walked around for a while. We circled around the campsite for about 10 minutes until we came back to our tent. That's when I noticed something that ran chills down my back. A few meters from the tent, in the corner of my eye, I managed to catch a glimpse of something red. It took me a second to realize I actually saw something, and when I turned my head to see what it was a red and black rubber axe. It was not there before. I knew it wasn't my dad's, because his was by the pile of wood he collected that night. From my dad's reaction, I probably turned pale because he started to freak out a little, like I was about to pass out or something. He turned his gaze to where I was looking, and we both just stared for a few seconds before he called out for the rest of the family to wake up and get moving. We were all packed up within an hour, and we rushed back home. I later told my dad what I saw that night, and he wouldn't believe me at first. I carried on with the story, and he finally realized I was telling the truth. To this day, I still have no clue who the fuck that was, but I'm just happy He didn't investigate our tent any further, or any other animal out in that forest. To the Axeman, who was outside my tent in the middle of the night, let's not meet. My family has a hunting cabin in the Allegheny National Forest of Pennsylvania. My grandpa, who worked at a steel mill in Pittsburgh, bought the land in the 70s whenever the real estate agents used to go to the mills and post ads for huge plots of land that the steel workers would break up and all get their own plots for dirt cheap, then help each other build their camps. Allegedly, there was a gravesite found on the property that my grandpa bought. The details aren't exactly clear how this was discovered, but apparently some type of survey was done before the property was sold, and archaeologists from the University of Pittsburgh uncovered a very old Native American grave. They excavated the grave, but the pit, by that point, now just a depression in the ground, was still there. This was on my grandpa's property, about 200 yards from the cabin. Of course, I don't know that any of this is true, but the depression was, and as far as I know, is still there, and that was the story we were all told. Of course, when I was a kid, my cousins and I used to do very dumb and disrespectful things, like go back to the site in the middle of the night and dare each other to lay down in it. I probably was about 10 years old when this happened in the early 90s. My dad swears he doesn't remember it, but my cousin I keep in touch with clearly also remembers it. We were sitting around the campfire, roasting hot dogs and marshmallows, talking, that type of thing. Obviously, there was no alcohol on my part, as I was like 10, and my dad didn't drink. I remember my dad shushing everybody, and my older cousins and my dad were talking about seeing somebody in the woods. My dad is telling everybody to be quiet and shines a flashlight into the woods. We don't see anybody. We go back to our business, and one of my cousins shouts out, "There he is again." By shielding the light from the fire, you can see a wispy grayish human figure walking through the woods slowly, like prowling, like he's trying not to make any noise. He was walking from our left, as if he came from behind the cabin and was crossing the wood line along our left, and then across the front of the yard, just along the trees, but probably 50 yards or so from us, taking a wide turn to avoid us. Nobody said a word. My dad and one of my cousins both shined flashlights several times, but he would disappear. You could only see him in the dark, and after your eyes adjusted. At some point, he walked into the field of view where the fire was between us and him, and we never saw him again. The creepy part is, the direction he was walking was towards the gravesite. We had never seen this before, and never saw it again. I probably spent a week every summer at that camp until I was about 20. Family drama and weirdness after my grandpa died kind of ruined the camp for us, and I haven't been back. Needless to say, we didn't mess with the grave again after this. An old friend of mine had a canine search and rescue operation and had several dogs that had different skills. He had dogs that were trained for different things, one to search for human remains, one that was trained to search for live survivors, including through the rubble of an accident or disaster sites, and even a little dog that could detect bed bugs. I would sometimes help in the training of the dogs by hiding in the woods or in hard-to-reach areas, and I loved doing it. It's amazing to see these incredible animals working. Plus, I loved them. I sat with him a lot when he was out searching in different parts of the country for actual victims. One afternoon, we were walking through the park with the cadaver dog, a beautiful German shepherd who was the face of the company. Not working, but we did have our canine search and rescue attire on when a man approached. He stopped us to ask if he could pet her, which is not uncommon, and she was super friendly and sweet. So we said of course. The weird thing is that the moment he stopped, The dog immediately gave her signal and lay down right by his feet. My friend and I looked at each other, almost in horror, because the dog was signaling that she detected human remains. She was the most experienced of all the dogs and would not have made a mistake. It was clearly her signal. It spooked us both so much that we cut the conversation short and left quickly. To this day, we have no idea what that was about. I should also add that she was trained to detect human remains. She was taught not to alert on animal remains. I still think about that day a lot. One Saturday, when I was around 13, my uncle came around with his girlfriend and my 2 younger cousins. Our other 2 cousins were staying at the flat for the weekend, and a further younger female cousin had asked Mom if she could also stay. This was a regular occurrence for us kids. The weekends and school holidays were free for all, a constant stream of kids staying at one place or another, making makeshift beds with beanbags and floor cushions, or just crashing out on the floor with sleeping bags. My mom and aunties all used to joke that during the holidays their homes turned into regular old doss house. Apart from my 5 cousins and I, my friend Jay was there. He too was at our flat every weekend, and his parents knew he would be okay. Mom had the reputation for being cool, yet very strict. We all hung out together, had a sandwich and drink, and played on the Sega. Then, Mom and my uncle's partner said we should all go for a walk. Everyone thought it was a great idea, so the 10 of us set out. The 3 adults decided that we should go to Donkey Woods, which is a bit of green wild land, owned by the council, much like Heathland. As kids, we used to go over there a lot in the spring, summer, and autumn, on our own or with family, and it was reasonably safe and kid-friendly, and still felt wild enough to make you feel adventurous, and not in West London. We all walked the half a mile down the road from the flats to Donkey Woods, where we walked along the river until we got further into the woods. And while Mom, my uncle, and his partner all sat down to have a cigarette, us 7 kids went exploring. As I've mentioned before, we all knew Donkey Woods really well and were totally at ease and comfortable over there, so we weren't expecting anything unusual or creepy at all. For us, it was just another mid-August, late Saturday afternoon, and we were just messing around. My cousin T, my friend Jay, and I were all talking, and suddenly the other 4 kids came running up. They hadn't been too far away, just slightly further down the river. They were all out of breath and looked a little rattled. The 4 of them told us that they had seen something weird in one of the small clearings. They wouldn't tell us, just said, "You have to come see." We all thought it was just a major wind-up, but when we got to the clearing, our mood changed quickly, not to fear, more like a sense of unsettling apprehension. In the middle of the clearing, there were 3 small tents in a rough triangle, and in the middle of these tents was a small, still smoldering fire, and around the edges of the clearing were several small dead birds. Sparrows, I think. The whole scene was very unnatural and eerie, and I felt a distinct drop in the temperature, most likely my imagination, but still quite evident. Now, the rough sleepers of the area did use Donkey Woods as a base, but not in that particular place of the woods, as it was too close to the main road, and the homeless people avoided harassment and abuse from certain unpleasant individuals by going further into the woods to prevent any kind of confrontation. The homeless people who lived near Donkey Woods also didn't use tents. They would make a shelter from pieces of wood and plastic sheeting, and Donkey Woods isn't a place where people go camping recreationally, so we felt there was something very strange about the scene in this clearing. I told the 4 younger ones to go and get the adults. While they were gone, me, Jay, and T didn't move. T, who was, and still is, tough as nails, was completely colorless. You couldn't see her freckles at all. I didn't even move my wheelchair around the area, as I normally would have, and Jay just kept saying, "What the actual fuck?" When the adults came back with the other kids, they were clearly unnerved by the odd scene, just as much as we were, and it was soon agreed by everyone that we should leave the clearing and Donkey Woods immediately. The most creepy part of this incident was the next morning. My uncle went to see my other uncle, and together they went over to Donkey Woods to look around more. They went to the clearing, but there was nothing there. Not even marks on the ground from the tent poles. No sign of the fire, and no tiny, dead birds. Hi friends, I hope you're staying safe. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. It would really mean a lot to me. Thank you for listening. Sweet dreams.